The capability maturity model in the secure controls framework is unique and can be a very powerful tool. This video explains the overall concept of the cybersecurity and data privacy capability maturity model, which we call the CPCM. There is a PDF on the SCF website that goes into details on this maturity model, and you are highly encouraged to read that to better understand these concepts. The CPCM draws upon the high-level structure of the System Security Engineering Capability Maturity Model version 2, abbreviated as SSECMM, since we felt it was the best model to demonstrate varying levels of maturity for people, processes, and technology at a control level. The 6 CPCMM levels are CMM0, not performed, CMM1, performed informally, CMM2, planned and tracked, CMM3, well-defined, CMM4, quantitatively controlled, and CMM5, continuously improving. Just like how one cannot run without first walking and how one cannot walk without first learning how to crawl, control-level maturity criteria are designed so that each succeeding level of maturity is built upon its predecessor. This is the fundamental concept of the CPCMM, where there are 6 levels, from 0 to 5. The CPCMM is designed to solve the problem of objectivity in both establishing and evaluating cybersecurity and data privacy controls. Its 4 main objectives are to, first, provide executives with objective criteria that can be used to establish expectations for a cybersecurity program. Second, provide objective criteria for project teams so that secure practices are appropriately planned and budgeted for. Third, provide minimum criteria that can be used to evaluate third-party service provider controls. And fourth, provide a means to perform due diligence of cybersecurity and data privacy practices as part of mergers and acquisitions. What is fascinating about this maturity model is that when you look at it, for many organizations, there is a sweet spot for the level of maturity that they can achieve. There is also a negligence threshold where a reasonable person could argue that any maturity less than level 2 could be considered negligent practices. This sweet spot is generally level 2 through 3 with maybe a few controls in level 4. When you look at the maturity model from a risk perspective, as you progress in maturity, your level of risk decreases sharply from level 0 to level 3. However, it is harder to show significant improvements in risk reduction as you increase maturity. When you look at the maturity model from a process review perspective, there is generally a significant lack of situational awareness in the lower levels of maturity. However, when you get up to higher levels of maturity, your process review lag decreases from years to months to near real time. Interestingly, when you get to level 5, that near real-time situational awareness and corrective action will be due to artificial intelligence or machine learning. Therefore, those controls being performed by AI or ML may be candidates for level 5 maturity. When you look at the maturity model from a stakeholder value perspective, there is significant value to get from level 0 to level 3 maturity. However, once you get beyond level 3, the cost associated with the maturity may outweigh stakeholder value. This is why, for many companies, the sweet spot is located within levels 2 and 3. At CPCMM level 0, this level of maturity is defined as non-existence practices, where the control is not being performed. Practices are non-existent, where a reasonable person would conclude the control is not being performed. And evidence of due care and due diligence do not exist to demonstrate compliance with applicable statutory, regulatory, and/or contractual obligations. Level 0 practices, or a lack thereof, are generally considered to be negligent. The reason for this is, if a control is reasonably expected to exist, by not performing the control, then that is negligent behavior. The need for the control could be due to a law, regulation, or contractual obligation, for example, a client contract or industry association requirement. At CPCMM level 1, this level of maturity is defined as ad hoc practices, where the control is being performed, but lacks completeness and consistency. The practices are ad hoc where the intent of a control is not met due to a lack consistency and formality. When the control is met, it lacks consistency and formality. A reasonable person would conclude the control is not consistently performed in a structured manner. Performance depends on specific knowledge and effort of the individual performing the tasks, where the performance of these practices is not proactively governed. And limited evidence of due care and due diligence exists, where it would be difficult to legitimately disprove a claim of negligence for how cybersecurity or privacy controls are implemented and maintained. Level 1 practices are generally considered to be negligent. The reason for this is if a control is reasonably expected to exist, by only implementing ad hoc practices in performing the control that could be considered negligent behavior. The need for the control could be due to a law, regulation, or contractual obligation. At CPCM Level 2, practices are requirements-driven where the intent of control is met in some circumstances, but not standardized across the entire organization. Practices are requirements-driven, specified by a law, regulation, or contractual obligation, and are tailored to meet those specific compliance obligations, for example, evidence of due diligence. Performance of a control is planned and tracked according to specified procedures and work products conform to specified standards, for example, evidence of due care. Controls are implemented in some, but not all applicable circumstances or environments, for example, specific enclaves, facilities or locations. A reasonable person would conclude controls are compliance-focused to meet a specific obligation, since the practices are applied at a local or regional level and are not standardized practices across the enterprise. And sufficient evidence of due care and due diligence exists to demonstrate compliance with specific statutory, regulatory, and/or contractual obligations. Level 2 practices are generally considered to be audit-ready with an acceptable level of evidence to demonstrate due diligence and due care in the execution of the control. Level 2 practices are generally targeted on specific systems, networks, applications or processes that require the control to be performed for a compliance need, for example, PCI DSS, HIPAA, CMMC, NIST 800-171, etc. It can be argued that Level 2 practices focus more on compliance over security. The reason for this is the scoping of Level 2 practices are narrowly focused and are not enterprise-wide. At CPCM Level 3, this level of maturity is defined as enterprise-wide standardization, where the practices are well-defined and standardized across the organization. Practices are standardized enterprise-wide where the control is well-defined and standardized across the entire enterprise. Controls are implemented in all applicable circumstances and environments. Practices are performed according to a well-defined process using approved, tailored versions of standardized processes. Performance of a control is according to specified well-defined and standardized procedures. Control execution is planned and managed using an enterprise-wide, standardized methodology. A reasonable person would conclude controls are security-focused that address both mandatory and discretionary requirements. Compliance could reasonably be viewed as a natural byproduct of secure practices. Sufficient evidence of due care and due diligence exists to demonstrate compliance with specific statutory, regulatory, and/or contractual obligations. And the Chief Information Security Officer, or similar function, develops a security-focused concept of operations, or CONOPS, that documents organization-wide management, operational and technical measures to apply defense in-depth techniques. Just to note, in this context, a CONOPS is a verbal or graphic statement of intent and assumptions regarding operationalizing the identified tasks to achieve the CISO's stated objectives. The result of the CONOPS is operating the organization's cybersecurity and data protection program so that it meets business objectives. Control or domain-specific CONOPS may be incorporated as part of a broader operational plan for the cybersecurity and data privacy program, for example, cybersecurity-specific business plan. Level 3 practices are generally considered to be audit-ready with an acceptable level of evidence to demonstrate due diligence and due care in the execution of the control. Unlike Level 2 practices that are narrowly focused, Level 3 practices are standardized across the organization. It can be argued that Level 3 practices focus on security over compliance, where compliance is a natural byproduct of those secure practices. These are well-defined and properly scoped practices that span the organization, regardless of the department or geographic considerations. At CPCM Level 4, this level of maturity is defined as metrics-driven practices, where in addition to being well-defined and standardized practices across the organization, there are detailed metrics to enable governance oversight. Practices are metrics-driven and provide sufficient management insight, based on a quantitative understanding of process capabilities, to predict optimal performance, ensure continued operations, and identify areas for improvement. Practices build upon established Level 3 maturity criteria and have detailed metrics to enable governance oversight. Detailed measures of performance are collected and analyzed. This leads to a quantitative understanding of process capability and an improved ability to predict performance. And performance is objectively managed, and the quality of work products is quantitatively known. Level 4 practices are generally considered to be audit-ready with an acceptable level of evidence to demonstrate due diligence and due care in the execution of the control, as well as detailed metrics enable an objective oversight function. Metrics may be daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, etc. At CPCM Level 5, this level of maturity is defined as world-class practices, where the practices are not only well-defined and standardized across the organization, as well as having detailed metrics, but the process is continuously improving. Practices are world-class capabilities that leverage predictive analysis. Practices build upon established Level 4 maturity criteria and are time-sensitive to support operational efficiency, which likely includes automated actions through machine learning or artificial intelligence. Quantitative performance goals for process effectiveness and efficiency are established, based on the business goals of the organization. And process improvements are implemented according to continuous improvement practices to effect process changes. Level 5 practices are generally considered to be audit-ready with an acceptable level of evidence to demonstrate due diligence and due care in the execution of the control and incorporates a capability to continuously improve the process. Interestingly, this is where artificial intelligence and machine learning would exist, since AI and ML would focus on evaluating performance and making continuous adjustments to improve the process. However, AI and ML are not required to be Level 5.